It's another Dynasty Rankings deep dive. Today we're talking tight ends. With some excellent veterans on the way out and a heap of young talent hitting the NFL, it's the perfect time to break down my Dynasty tight end rankings. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down. Thanks for joining me on the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley. If you haven't already, make sure you like and subscribe on YouTube. You will want to like and subscribe, especially because I've got some awesome videos coming out in the next week. I've done a massive deep dive into the hit rates of every single rookie position. I've looked back the last 20 years to see what to expect from players in every single position, and it really surprised me on what we should expect from a couple of rookies. So make sure you look out for that in the coming days. Also, check us out on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down and on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. Now, today we're talking about tight ends, and I'm taking you through my tight end dynasty rankings. And I've made quite a few moves since last season. There's a lot of guys just starting to fade out and some big names coming in. And the biggest one is Sam Laporta, the first overall tight end last year. It's very unusual for tight ends to have big rookie seasons. It doesn't happen very often, but Laporta was the real exception. We knew that last season was going to be an excellent rookie class for tight ends, and it turned out to be the case. But not a lot of people expected Laporta to be the main guy. He was my second rookie tight end by the end of the rookie draft season. Didn't really think he'd end up ahead of Kincaid, but ultimately this situation turned out perfect for him. There's so little competition there. There's Amon-Ra St. Brown, and there's him. They're basically the pass catchers at the moment. Jamison Williams obviously is there as the second wide receiver at the moment, but he's not shown much in the last couple of years. So I expect a lot of this offense is going to be funneled through the same guys, and that's going to be excellent for Sam Laporta, who could be in for another top fantasy season next season. Only 22 years old. He's definitely the best first tight end you should be taking. Now, the real question is, where do you take him in your dynasty drafts? Well, that's the main question. It really depends on your league settings. And if you do want help, make sure you hit me up on Twitter and or Instagram, and I'm happy to help you out with your specific league settings. I'm thinking somewhere around late second, early third round is usually the best situation. But if you've got tight end premium, you can take him even earlier. The only reason he's not going earlier is because there is so much depth at the position at the moment. That's not been the case previously. Now, second, this is going to surprise a lot of people. I've got Brock Bowers in here. I really like Brock Bowers. I've liked Brock Bowers for a long time because he's been fantastic as a pass catcher in college. There's a little bit concerned about how exactly he's going to be used and whether he's going to be out there on every single down. But I think the fact that he went so close to the top 10 means really good things. Players who go in the top 16 picks as tight ends, and it doesn't happen very often, pretty much always hit. They're always good for fantasy because they get such a long runway to succeed. Even if it doesn't work out this year, it will probably work at some point in time. You're not always going to get a Kyle Pitts situation where you have a big first year and drop off, but you are likely to get success at some point in time. Bowers goes into an interesting situation in Vegas. I don't like the fact that Michael Mayer is still there because I actually kind of like Michael Mayer, but new coaching staff, I think they're just going all in on Bowers. I think he is going to be the guy. Wouldn't surprise me if he plays that kind of big slot role that we saw a little bit from Dalton Kincaid last year in Buffalo when they had two tight ends out there. He is the pass catching guy. That's his main thing, and he's going to be excellent at it for the long term. We're talking about a guy who's going to be fantasy useful for the next 10 years. That's why he's above so many other players to me. It's that period of time where he's going to have success and the talent that he brings to the position. He is a true first rounder, and that's so rare for tight ends these days. Following up from him, it's Mark Andrews. And realistically, if you're in a situation where you're looking to win now, I think there's a reasonable argument to suggest that Mark Andrews could go second. We know how good he's been for the long term when he stayed healthy. The problem has been staying healthy. When he's healthy, he's nearly always a top 3 tight end, and he looked like he was going to be last season, but he only played 10 games. Same thing happened in 2020, missing games. Staying on the field is the big issue for him. Plus, they have brought in a lot of wide receiver talent, And that's going to be a bit of an issue because most of his success came when he was the number one show in town. Whether Zay Flowers can take over and be the guy, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. They haven't really brought in a clear number two guy at the moment. It's a little bit of Bateman. It was Beckham last year, of course, as well. But now we're talking Bateman, Aguilar. Neither of those guys are really going to threaten Andrews. But the fact that they're trying to make their wide receivers better is a bit of a concern long term because we could see them go wide receiver again in the near future. Because this is Dynasty, you have to take that into account. For that reason, he drops a little bit for me. But I still expect this year he's probably going to be a top 3 tight end, targeting guys like Travis Kelce and Sam Laporta, of course, as the main competition. Kyle Pitts is the guy I'm expecting to have a big bounce back. I was pretty low on him last year because of all that was going on, but now there's a new coaching staff in. Now that they've brought in Kirk Cousins, who we know can be really good with his tight ends, I think in the short term that's going to be beneficial. Plus, I think Michael Penix will suit him as well. They haven't really brought in any true number 2 or number 3 wide receivers, which signals they're mainly going to funnel this offense through Bijan Robinson, through Drake London, and through Kyle Pitts. That's a boost for all 3 guys. You'd have to feel like Pitts bounces back. This is a fantastic situation for him. I expect that he's going to be a top tight end, but it does come with risk because of what we've seen the last few seasons. But we're talking about a top 10 tight end who's only 23 years old, still got a long future ahead of him. That talent is going to show over the long term, and that's what you should be targeting. Don Kincaid comes right after him, and he was okay last season, but it took him a while to take over from Dawson Knox. He looked better when Knox was injured and kind of took a little step back when Knox returned. That's a bit of a concern. But we're talking about an uber-talented tight end. They're going to use him for the long term. Knox isn't going to be around forever. This is a guy who's going to take over the offense. And realistically, without any really excellent wide receivers, we're talking Keon Coleman, a rookie, Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, who's realistically just a 5th-round guy. Kincaid's probably the number 1 pass-catching option there, at least for the near future. He's certainly the best red zone guy. I would expect he gets a lot of targets. This could be an undervalue for him, depending on how things go. There's just so much risk because of having Knox there, and because I think they probably will continue to try to rebuild the wide receivers. But when you've got Josh Allen, that's always going to be a boost, except in the red zone where he does run it a little bit too much. TJ Hawkinson's had a fantastic last couple of seasons, but this injury is really going to hurt. Exactly how it impacts him, we don't know. He could miss up to half of next season, though he's expecting to be back maybe around week 5 or 6, although reports keep on changing. It's hard to know exactly what to expect. I'm really buying this as more of a long-term situation. We're talking about a guy who's still pretty young. He's still got a long time ahead of him. He's probably not even reached his prime yet, and he's still got 3 top 3 seasons to his name. He's in a strong offense, though they are lacking Kirk Cousins now. It'll be interesting to see how that impacts them. But I do think because it's just him, Jefferson, and Addison as being the main guys, there are enough targets to sustain him. I feel like he's still good value. I'm not overly comfortable putting him here. There is a big gap between him and Kincaid for me, and I might drop him down 1 or 2 spots depending on what happens with this injury and how he recovers from it. I'm nervous about him, but the upside is huge, and for that reason, I do like the idea of taking him on the early side, certainly compared to a lot of the other guys around. Trey McBride's the guy I've considered moving up. I feel like I'm probably a little bit too low on him. We're talking about a guy who's 24 years old, which is pretty old for a guy who's just breaking out these days. In the old days, it used to be 2nd, 3rd year was around when tight ends would break out, but it started to move a little bit earlier these days. And so I'd started to give up on McBride halfway through last season. I loved him as a rookie, and I was really disappointed. So I'm glad it finally worked. But we're talking about an offense that had nothing at all. Marquise Brown was gone halfway through the season. It was Michael Wilson as the number 1 pass catcher. That's not the case this season. They've got an elite wide receiver option in Marvin Harrison Jr. They brought in another running back in Trey Benson, so they're going to want to keep running the ball. Kyler Murray's going to run a little bit more than now that he's a little bit healthier as well. They've got enough coming in there. Zay Jones arrives as well. They've got enough coming in there that I'm worried about Trey McBride's target share. And it really was the target share that got him over the line last season. He did have quite a few dud games, but he had a couple of really explosive games and got so many receptions that they made it work. I don't think in the long term, this team's going to need to keep chasing games. And I don't think in the long term, he's going to be getting a dozen targets a game. I think it's going to get scaled back a little bit. And that's the concern for me. They also drafted a blocking guy in the 3rd round in Tip Ryman. So I do think there's enough signs here to be concerned about McBride. but not so concerned that you don't draft him at all. I just think he's going too early. Some people are taking him second off the board, which seems crazy to me. There's so much more talent ahead of him. McBride's good, but he's not as good as those other guys. And so for that reason, for me, I don't think I'm going to end up with many McBride shares this year. And I'd recommend that you ease back on him a little bit and wait till the value is truly there. I think it's okay to take him in front of Hawkinson. I think certainly from a long-term aspect, that's a good bet, but I'm not willing to take him again ahead of those other young guys. David Njoku's a guy who's had a big bounce back. He struggled to stay healthy the last few years, but looked really good last season. Now, a lot of that was based on target share because they had nothing else, and also because Joe Flacco was getting really involved in throwing the ball at heat. The fact they didn't have Nick Chubb and couldn't run the balls effectively. They had Amari Cooper. He didn't look 100%, but he was still solid. But they didn't really have a second wide receiver. They were trying to make it Elijah Moore, and it wasn't working. I do think we see that improve a little bit this season, but realistically, Njoku's still going to be one of the top pass-catching options in this offense. How much they actually pass the ball compared to how much they run it now with Deshaun Watson back is a big question mark. We don't know exactly what this offense is going to look like long-term. That makes me a bit nervous. Plus, Njoku is getting a bit older, but we are talking about a guy who's one of the best tight ends for fantasy over the last half of last season, and you have to respect that. And I think you have to consider that that could definitely happen again. I just don't think it's as locked in as some of these other guys, but the talent's definitely there. We are still talking about an early first-round tight end. George Kittle, I mean, there's no shortage of talent here, but there's also no shortage of talent around him. You've got Christian McCaffrey, you've got Deebo Samuel, you've got Brandon Ayuk. They just brought in Ricky Pearsall and Jacob Cowing. There's plenty of talent to compete against, but there's no other tight end talent. This is the only tight end in town. George Kittle can do the blocking and he can do the receiving work as well. He's an excellent tight end and he has been for a long time. 4 top 5 tight end seasons in the last 5 seasons. Struggled to stay healthy for a bit, but looked better last year, even though he did have the odd game or two off. I think he's going to continue to be good for a few seasons, but realistically, you're talking about a guy who's in his 30s. The drop-off will happen at some stage, and it's going to happen sooner rather than later. So I wouldn't be going out of my way to get him unless I'm trying to win right now and I can't get someone like a Kelsey. Because realistically, Kittle's got 5 seasons max in him. I think we're probably talking more like 1 to 3 as being a relevant fantasy option before he hits that drop-off point that we've seen with guys like Zach Ertz recently. Ertz and Kittle were ranked really similar recently, and you've just seen Ertz just drop off entirely. I think we probably see the same thing happen with Kittle. Travis Kelce has kind of started to hit that drop-off point, but he was still the second tight end last year. We're talking about a guy who's still producing, but there's so much risk there now. He looked excellent in the fantasy playoffs, but you do have to wonder if they're going to try to start transitioning away from him as early as this season. I think probably that happens more likely next season, but you've got to respect a guy who's so consistently a top 2 fantasy option. Whether it happens again this season, we'll have to see, but he's Travis Kelce. If he's available and you're trying to win now, I'd still take a punt on him. I wouldn't be risking, say, a first-round pick on him unless I'm like, I must win this year. I have no other tight ends. I have to get someone. Then sure, go for it, get Kelce, and then burn the next couple of years after that. But I think there is a massive risk. We saw how much of a dud he was in the fantasy playoffs last year. I think we're going to see a little bit more of that going forward. I think he's going to be a lot more boom bust than he has been in the past. Evan Ingram is number 11. He had a fantastic end to last season as well. 2 top 5 seasons the last couple of seasons, but he's 29 now. That's the major issue here. I think in my redraft rankings, they're going to have him a lot higher. I think he'll still be good in this coming season. They do have to pass to somebody, and their pass catches are just all a little bit all over the place at the moment. Calvin Ridley's obviously out the door. They bring in Brian Thomas. I don't really know what's going to happen there. I do think that Ingram's going to stay involved. You're going to see a lot of Christian Kirk, of course, as well. But I do think that Ingram's going to be one of the big parts of this offense, and they're going to have to pass the ball a lot. In fact, they're just going to have to score a lot because I don't know that their defense is really solid enough to sustain the challenge that they need to make. Realistically, he just needs Trevor Lawrence to generally get better. This whole offense does. But I do think Ingram's still going to be solid for fantasy. He's done a really good job of staying healthy recently. We're talking about another guy who produced straight out of the gate and has continued to for quite some time. Had some off seasons late on in his time with the Giants, but has been really good with the Jaguars. And I do expect that that will continue in the short term. But I'm not as confident as guys like Kittle and Kelsey, who are those elite players who are essentially number 1 or number 2 options in their offense. Jake Ferguson had a good season last season. kind of the second pass catching option, depending on what you think of Brandon Cooks. They definitely don't have a wide receiver 3. For that reason, he certainly has value, and he's only 24 years old. He was pretty good at Wisconsin. I had him in college fantasy, and he was a solid producer, but I did not expect this sort of situation where he'd become a top 10 tight end. I'm still not exactly sure what to expect from him. I'm not convinced that he's going to continually be that guy. I do wonder whether we continue to see guys like Peyton Hendershot getting involved. We saw that in his rookie season quite a bit, in Ferguson's rookie season, and early last season. So I'm not sure exactly how this filters out. This is definitely Ferguson's tight end room, but I do think that he probably misses a few more snaps that he did last season, and that'll mean a bit of a drop-off. There's just more upside with the other guys ahead of him, but he is still a safe option that you can take later on in drafts. Another pretty safe option is Dallas Goedert. The main risk here is his inability to stay healthy, but he's the clear number 3 offensive option behind A.J. Brown, behind Devonta Smith. He's been consistently finishing in that top 12, top 13 region, despite the injuries, and the injuries continue to be the issue. He can't stay healthy. He's 29 years old. That's a concern. So much risk there, but high-powered offense. He's clearly the starting tight end, so at least there's safety in that aspect. But you're talking about a guy who's probably not going to help you for much more than a few seasons. So you're only getting him if you're trying to win now, and if you don't really have any other viable options. Cole Kmet's taken a real drop-off for me. He was in my top 10 Dynasty rankings and certainly my redraft rankings going into this season. I thought he could be really good with Caleb Williams. Then they go and bring in a whole heap of pass captures with Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze coming in there. That's a big issue for Kmet. They had practically no one but DJ Moore and him last season. This season, they bring in some real talent. That's going to hurt Kmet a lot. We're talking about a guy who's only 24 years old. He was the top tight end in his class. I do feel like he's still got enough talent to produce, but I'm not expecting another top 10 season in this coming season. It might happen if he stays healthy and other guys don't, but we're talking about a guy who's going to be very inconsistent and hard to trust. He's not someone I'll go out of my way to get, but later in Dynasty drafts, if you kind of punched at the position, he is someone that you can slot in knowing that it might work out okay. I do think there's more upside options around, though. Pat Frymuth, another guy who's very risky. He was the tight end 6 in 2022. It's hard to believe that we've only had one season since then. He was so poor last season. He wasn't being used properly. He had these random boom games, but realistically, he was barely involved a lot of the time. There was a lot more Darnell Washington involved. Connor Hayward was starting getting involved, even though he's only a 6th round player. It was all just a little bit too messy for me. Plus, I don't know. I just don't really trust the offense particularly. They've now got Russell Wilson, who does like to hold on the ball a lot. That's not really what you want if you're Pat Frymuth. You want someone who's just going to get it out quickly and have to check down to you. So a little bit concerned about that aspect. If Justin Fields is there, he's not going to check down either. He's going to run. So although we did see him get a little bit out of Cole Kmet in the past, I'm nervous about Frymuth. I'm nervous about this whole offense. The only thing that makes me feel good about Frymuth is the fact that they don't really have any great pass catchers aside from George Pickens. It's essentially Pickens and the running backs, and then they brought in Roman Wilson, who is unproven, is a 3rd-round guy, and there's a lot of risk there. I do really rate the Steelers' ability to produce with day 2 wide receivers, but Frymuth's got to be in there as probably a top 3 option. I just don't know how much value a top 3 option has in this offense. Dalton Schultz is another guy who's just a little bit low because of how many other players there are around him. We know that CJ Stroud was very good, but I mean, they brought in Stephon Diggs. That's going to hurt him. They still have Tank Dell. They still have Nico Collins. They still have Robert Woods, and they still have Noah Brown as well. We're talking about a lot of talking about a lot of wide receivers who've produced. And they brought in Cade Stover as an extra tight end as well. They have a lot of good tight ends. They still have Tegan Kitoriano. That might be right. Not sure. You can work it out yourself. They've got plenty going on. They've still got Brevin Jordan, who's a good pass-catching tight end. They've got a lot of guys in their pass-catching rooms. I know they gave a lot of money to Dalton Schultz, but it's hard to trust exactly what that's going to mean. I think his upside is capped, even though I do think a top 12 finish is very, very possible in the coming season. Luke Musgrave's an interesting one. I really liked him going into last season as a bit of a sleeper, and he was good until he got injured and Tucker Kraft took over. Now, it does seem like this is probably Luke Musgrave's job still, but the fact that Kraft is there and the fact that they went, I'm going to take a 2nd and 3rd round receiver is pretty nerve-wracking. I don't feel particularly good about that situation. So that makes me a little bit unsure about exactly what's going to happen. So We'll have to wait and see exactly what this means to Musgrave. I've got to say, he's got upside, plenty of upside, especially with Jordan Love, but there's so many other pass catchers there. Tucker Kraft being there is the biggest issue, though. My second rookie, Jatavion Sanders, it's not Ben Sinnott. A lot of people like Ben Sinnott. I've got these guys back to back. They're really close for me. The fact that Sanders went in the 4th round is my main concern. I actually like him so much more as a player, but I don't like the fact that he's going to Carolina. That's generally an ugly situation. And I don't like the fact that he was taken so much later, because the NFL is pretty good at working out where the value is with players, and they clearly decided there was more value with Sinnott than Sanders. You've just got to hope that maybe Washington was wrong, and that other teams were wrong on passing on Sanders, and not a lot of teams realistically needed tight ends this season anyway. That makes me a bit nervous about Sanders, but really like the talent, really like the pass-catching talent in particular. So that's why I've ranked him over Sinnott. I just feel like he's a better player based on my rating of him, based on what I've seen of him, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if Sinnott turns out to be the better player. Sinnott is a couple of years older, and he went to Washington, which is a good landing spot. Or it should have been. Logan Thomas hasn't been able to make it work there, but he should be the clear number 1 tight end, and that's useful. Zach Ertz is there as well, and I feel like initially it might be a little bit of committee, but we're talking Dynasty. Won't be long before Sinnott takes over. He's not a bad later round guy to get in your Dynasty drafts, but you'd only really want to get him if he's your second tight end and you've got more of a future look to what you're doing. If you're planning on winning this year, I don't think Sinnott's particularly going to be the guy for you, though neither is Sanders either. Coming in behind them, Kate Otten, who was surprisingly good in the playoffs, but generally has been a little bit disappointing when it comes to what I thought he could potentially be. I was a big fan of Kate Otten when he got drafted. He got drafted a bit later than I hoped. I thought he might be the top tight end in his class. He's kind of produced at weird times. He was very good in the playoffs, as we saw. Baker Mayfield does know how to use him, but I've got concerns. I've got worries about how they're using him, about what they're going to do. So we'll have to wait and see what. Now, next up is Hunter Henry. We're talking about an uber-talented tight end who's been a little disappointing since he left the Chargers to go to New England. He had one boom season and then has fallen off as the whole offense around him has fallen off. Mac Jones has been pretty mediocre in general, and that's really hurt Henry. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Jacoby Brissett and Drake May. There's a lot of pass catchers who are pretty average there. I do think that Jalen Polk's going to be the main guy in that offense. I know a lot of people like Javon Baker. I don't. You're going to have to watch my wide receiver hit rate show to understand exactly why. But I don't know that Hunter Henry is going to be the clear number 2 guy. I think we're just going to see a lot of bits and pieces of everybody. Kendrick Bourne will be involved. Demario Douglas is probably still involved. It wouldn't surprise me if Juju somehow manages to have a very minor role, just enough to be inconvenient. So even though Henry's the clear top tight end, I don't think that has the value it used to have with the Patriots. Following him is Michael Mayer, who's taken a real drop-off after what's happened with them drafting Brock Bowers. I still think the talent's there. We're talking about a second-round tight end who looked okay at times. He does need to improve the blocking to be consistently on the field. The problem is that he's more of a pass-catching tight end who can block okay, but Bowers comes in as the clear pass-catching tight end, so Mayer's kind of going to have to be the blocking guy, at least for a while. But I do think there's upside. There's a possibility that they're just both out there a heap and they don't really use a third wide receiver, and that means Mayer would be okay. There's the possibility that Mayer just gets moved on, that they move him somewhere else, and he's got the talent to make it work. I'm more ranking him here on talent because the situation is very ugly, but he's very young. He's someone I'm willing to take a shot on, but if things don't change and if it looks like he's not getting used properly, he's going to drop like a stone down my rankings. There's still just a little bit of upside there, and more so than a lot of the other guys around here, which is why I've got him ranked this high at the moment. Juwan Johnson was good in 2022. He was a top 10 player in 2022, but that was always going to be a little bit of a fluke, and I don't think anyone really believed that was going to happen again. There's a heap of issues with the Saints in general at the moment. Derek Carr's not really going to be able to sustain a lot of top fantasy players. Michael Thomas is gone, which at least helps Johnson a little bit, but this is Chris Olave in the running backs game. This is going to be an ugly offense, I think. I think we're going to see a little bit of everything. We're going to see a lot of random wide receivers. We're going to see Taysom Hill. We're going to see the running backs get a lot of receptions as well. It's just hard to trust Johnson. I just don't think he actually has the talent to bank on. I feel like the situation feels good, But I mean, we saw it wasn't particularly good last year, and I don't think there's any reason to believe there's going to be a big step up this year. So I'm not really interested in him. If anything, he's someone I'm probably dropping in quite a lot of dynasty leagues. I think there is an argument to say maybe you hang on to him for another, I don't know, couple of games just to see how his snap counts look earlier in the season, or see how he's being used in the preseason. But if you need to get roster space, he's someone that I'm willing to drop. Noah Fant's an interesting one. He's probably someone that I could see rising kind of towards the edge of the top 20. It's hard to know exactly what Seattle's going to do. They brought in AJ Barner, but he is more of a blocking tight end. But we've seen them want to keep using a committee. It's hard to know if they're going to keep doing that, know that they don't have Pete Carroll there. It wouldn't surprise me if Fant gets a little bit more involved, but he hasn't exactly had a lot of great fantasy seasons. He's been a little bit of a bust after being a first-round player way back when, but he does have that top 12 finishes in 2020, 2021 in him. It is possible he bounces back. There is that upside of the fact that he's only 26 years old. He is now the clear number one receiving tight end. But I wouldn't be surprised if they either bring in someone else or they just continue using it as a committee. I think both of those things are possible, and that makes me nervous enough that I'm not willing to rank him higher at the moment. Chig Okonkwo was really disappointing last year. I really had high hopes for him. I felt like he was going to be the second or third pass catcher in this offense. That just plain wasn't the case. There really wasn't a great second or third pass catcher in this offense. And even though it might have been Okonkwo, he just didn't get used properly. They kept bringing him out for blocking tight ends. Their run game was still their number one priority with Derrick Henry. They're going to throw a lot more this year, but they've got a lot more pass catchers to pass to as well. They've brought in Tyler Boyd, and more importantly, they've brought in Calvin Ridley, and DeAndre Hopkins is still there. So there's going to be three good wide receivers ahead of him now. He's not someone you're going to be able to rely on for fantasy, especially with Will Levis there, who's more of a good boundary passer. So I just don't think this is a good situation for Cheek. I'm probably dropping him in most of my leagues as well. I might even drop him down my rankings depending on what else happens in Tennessee. Tucker Kraft's an awkward one because he actually looked pretty good when he was playing at times, but he's now clearly behind Luke Musgrave for me. He's just here on the gamble that potentially he somehow wins the starting job, because I think that job might have value. I think it's probably trending towards Musgrave or maybe even a committee, but Kraft has the upside. We're still talking about a guy who was picked in the third round. They might still use him, and it's possible he gets moved somewhere else in the future. So in deeper leagues, there is a reason to hold on to him. If you've got him in a taxi squad, hold on to him unless you have better options, but he's bordering on droppable in most leagues. So is Jonnu Smith. He's probably been dropped. I think some people probably picked him up last season because he's actually a top 20 tight end. That's not going to happen in the same way this year. He's now probably the number one pass-catching tight end in Miami. Don't really know what they're doing with him and Durham Smythe, and they've also got some blockers in there. They got Julian Hill. It's hard to know exactly what's happening in Miami, but their number two options in this offense are not top two options, sorry, in this offense are very clear cut. It's Tyreek Hill, it's Jalen Waddle, and it's run the ball a heap. Everyone else is a bit part. There are going to be games where they use the tight end a lot. We saw that with Durham Smythe last season. That makes him a little bit useful in things like best ball, but I don't think in most situations you're going to really want Jonnu Smith. He should be in his prime, and that means that technically he should be able to step up into a top role. And we've seen him do it before he was very disappointing when he went to New England. Can he do it again? I think it's possible. I think there's upside there. That's why I've got him at least ranked in my top 30, but there's a massive amount of risk. If this was Durham Smythe and Jonnu Smith hadn't turned up, no one is even thinking about drafting that guy. And Smith isn't so talented that you go, oh, well, this makes all the difference in the world. He was basically just a cheap, better pass-catching replacement. I don't believe in this particularly high at all. Isaiah Likely, quite a few people like. I don't really see it. It's still clearly Mark Andrews. He's essentially a handcuff. And handcuffs don't work great with tight ends. We saw when Andrews was injured last season, Likely was okay, but he wasn't so good that if Andrews gets injured, you're like, oh, now I've got a league winner on my hands, like works with running backs. We're talking about a guy who, when Andrews is injured, is like, oh, maybe I'll pick him up off waivers. That's not someone you need to be rostering when Andrews is healthy. I don't see the point. The only hope here is that potentially Andrews gets moved on if they truly believe in Likely in the next season or two, or alternatively, Likely moves on and actually goes into a proper role. I think both of those things are pretty unlikely, so this is really just more of a weird handcuff play in tight end premium in leagues or in leagues that are particularly deep. Greg Dulcich is an interesting one. He looked solid in his first season. He is a good pass-catching tight end, but they brought in Adam Troutman, and Sean Payton was pretty clear-cut. Adam Troutman's out there on the first couple of downs. He's going to block. He's going to pass-catch a little bit, and then Greg Dulcich comes in on third downs. That proved to be very disappointing last year for a lot of people who drafted him way too early. I wasn't particularly shocked by that. We know Sean Payton loves Adam Troutman. I actually thought Troutman was going to be a better player when he came out than he turned out to be. This is still going to be a committee. There's no arguments there. This is a committee. They've got a million wide receivers. They're not using their tight ends as their main receiving options. Unless Dulcich can somehow become an every down tight end, which I don't see happening, there's no value here at all. Tyler Conklin's an interesting one because he's been in the top 18 the last 3 seasons, and he does it very quietly. The problem is he doesn't have a lot of big games, and there's not really a particularly valuable role here now that they've started bringing in actual wide receivers. So it's hard to know what to expect from this situation. My biggest concern with Conklin, though, is not that competition. It's the fact that he's getting older. He should be in his prime, but he doesn't offer you any clear value now that he's in his prime. And I do think that Jeremy Ruckert might start to take over a little bit more. He's a better blocking tight end, and he's a solid pass catcher. It wouldn't surprise me if they start to transition this across a little bit. At least CJ Uzama's gone, which does give you a little bit of security, but it's really hard to feel good about Conklin. He could end up with another top 20 tight end finish, but I can't imagine a situation where Tyler Conklin is playing even semi-regularly for you and you somehow win your league in that situation. That seems very unlikely outside the deepest of leagues. Here's the rest of my top 40. Mike Gesicki goes into an interesting situation in Cincinnati, but it is notable that they also drafted 2 tight ends. They did draft him on day 3, and that means something, but Eric Hall is a valuable player, and I did like him at Iowa. It's hard to know exactly what they're expecting of Gesicki. Based on what they did last year, probably just a really big, ugly committee. I think that's probably the same thing that happens. I think they've essentially just replaced Irv Smith Jr., but there's still going to be some Tanner Hudson. There's going to be some Mike Gesicki, but you're going to see some Eric Hall. You're going to see some Tanner McLaughlin as well, who they brought in. So, excuse me. So I don't think this is a situation I'm particularly interested in. Plus, Gesicki's 28 years old. He's really been pretty much a bust for most of his career. I don't see this working. Tyler Higbee is hitting that point where he's falling off. I do think that they're going to start to see what they have in guys like Davis Allen, for example. I think we just see them start to replace him with other guys. Colby Parkinson goes there as well. I think this becomes a committee, and maybe Higbee just falls off entirely. Dawson Knox, unfortunately, got screwed by the committee situation with Dalton Kincaid. He became more of the blocking guy. He looked pretty good at times, but he's 27 years old. He's still under contract for the next couple of seasons. I don't see him turning into a fantasy-relevant player without a Kincaid injury. Jelani Woods was disappointing last season. He just ended up being injured the whole season, but it's not like a situation where they went, oh, he's injured, he's out for the season. It was like, he's injured, he'll be back soon, he'll be back soon, he'll be back soon, the season's over. Very weird one. Still only, 25 years old, so he's got plenty of future ahead of him, but it's hard to say that they value him. They keep bringing in other tight ends. They've got a million tight ends now, and some of them are pretty talented. I kind of like Will Mallory. I kind of like Andrew Ogilvy, and they're not even in their top 4 tight ends, so it's hard to know what they're going to do here. I feel like it's going to be an ugly committee between Woods, Kylan Granson, some Mo Alley Cox, and we see a little bit of Mallory and Ogletree, so I don't want any part of that, but if you want a part of it, Woods is the guy to get. Same situation with Eric Hall. Eric Hall is in that ugly committee in Cincinnati. I like him, but we're talking about a rookie tight end going into an awkward situation. He's 24 years old coming out of college. The upside's pretty capped. Hayden Hurst goes to the Chargers, and this is another committee situation. I don't think that Hurst is going to be the every down back, and even if he is, he's 30 years old. This is Dynasty. What are you doing? Like, there's way too much risk there. They've still got Will Dissly. We know how they love using Will Dissly wherever he goes. They've still got Donald Parham as well. I mean, this is just going to be a big mess. If Gerald Everett couldn't make it work there and they brought in 2 guys to replace him, then this isn't going to get any better. Hurst had very limited upside. Theo Johnson goes to the Giants. I don't understand what to make of that whole Giants situation. I mean, he's an okay tight end. Like, a lot of people thought he'd be the second tight end off the board, but he very clearly wasn't. He goes into a situation where I feel like this is more of a contingency planning situation, but they didn't really commit to the contingency plan. They kind of just brought in a guy who can be okay and play alongside Daniel Bellinger. I do think that there is enough upside there because he's 23 years old and he could be the starting tight end in New York. I think that at least adds some value, but the chances of that happening is pretty darn low. Taysom Hill he is what he is. He's 33 years old now. He's not going to be a quarterback as much as people keep saying, hey, I've got a quarterback in my tight end spot. That's not happening anymore. Realistically, he's going to be used as just a bit of everything weapon. How much he gets used, we don't know. He's not going to be around for too much longer. This is Dynasty after all. I'm not particularly interested. I just think the upside is too low. Best ball, this is a different situation. It'd be quite a bit higher in best ball. But again, unless you're playing Dynasty best ball where you're trying to win now, not a lot of value. Darren Waller scares me so much. I've got him too low. I understand I have him too low, but we're talking about a guy who's very near to that drop-off, being 31 years old. It's just really hard to trust him, to trust that he's even going to play this season, to trust what it looks like, to think that on any given day he might just decide he's not playing anymore. That I don't want any part of that. Realistically, we're not in a situation anymore where he's the clear number one receiver. They brought in Malik Neighbors. Now he's at best the number two if he plays, and who knows how committed he's going to be. He might get one injury and he's done for the season. I don't see it. People are going to say that's way too low. I mean, you say that. We'll see what works out. There is upside there. I do understand that, but unless you're winning now and you're desperate for tight end, you just need someone to gamble on. I don't see the point in Waller. Gerald Everett comes in at 40, and this is very uninspiring. As uninspiring as my inability to put an S on the end of Chicago Bears. I think that this really only has value if Cole Kmet gets injured. And even if that happens, you still got three really good wide receivers. I don't understand why they brought in Everett. It doesn't really make sense to me. It more just makes me scared of Kmet more than making me like Everett. The reason I've got him in here still is we're still talking about a guy who's a good pass-catching tight end when he gets a lead role. So you just don't know what's going to happen. There's not a lot of value around outside him. So he slides into my top 40, but he's a long way behind Waller. And that's saying something. And that's all I got for you today. Thanks for joining me for my tight end dynasty rankings. I'll be back with rookie hit rates. That's right. I'll be talking about what we should expect from all of this year's bumper rookie class. What happens when you're drafted earlier in the first round as a wide receiver? What happens if you're drafted as a third round running back? We can look at what we should expect from these players and how we should value that compared to the other players who are drafted elsewhere. Are we overvaluing certain players because we believe they're talented, but the NFL is telling us otherwise? I learned a lot going through it, and I hope you'll join me over the next week as I'll go through a whole heap of different positions, really changing up my rankings a lot as well. And then I'll be back with updated rookie and dynasty rankings as well in the coming weeks. Please make sure you like and subscribe on YouTube. You can also follow us on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down, and you can hit me up on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. My full rankings are at ffdfantasyfootball.com. Of course, I answer all your questions on any of those platforms, so feel free to leave a comment down below if you're on YouTube, or to follow and ask questions on Instagram or Twitter. I will be back and see you soon.